I really enjoyed running with you today. Don't you have any money for shoes? Did the Crips beat you up and take yours too? They took mine and now my dad only buys me cheap ones from Payless.
Hello Internet, my name is Damian Michaels, but you can call me Blue, and welcome back to another episode of Blues Brews. This week, we're slipping past our opponent's defenses with Tetsuko Umezawa Fugitive. Before we begin, just a quick reminder that I'm sponsored by Dubby Energy. If you want to experience a new way to energize with zero sugar, calories, or other fillers that doesn't cause you to crash or jitter, then click the link in the description and use coupon code THEDamianMichaels for 10% off your next order. My personal favorite flavor is Dragonade, and they just recently released the new Grandpa's Denture Water, a mango-based flavor to remind you of those nights with Grandpa. And if you're looking for some more Commander decks to spice up your paper collection, then head on over to ThursdayNightMagic.com to find a variety of custom-made pre-constructed decks, many of which were built by yours truly. These decks are designed to be strong out of the box without breaking the bank, and they're all perfect for hanging out with friends or teaching a new player. So check them out and discover your new favorite Commander. So with Duskmorn releasing, I figured I'd listen to the story through Wizard's YouTube channel, and during the story, we start on Kamigawa, where Kaito is doing some ninja stuff, and this is what inspired me to play today's deck. While I'm not playing a Kaito deck, I did want to play something in the spirit of Kamigawa. So Tetsuko is a 1/3 for 1 and a blue that says that creatures we control with power or toughness 1 or less can't be blocked. In Paper Magic, this is often used as an infect commander with things like Blighted Agent and other similar creatures, but we're not doing that today. And while I am playing a very small toxic package with Prosthetic Injector, Mirax, and Thrumming Bird, we're not dedicated to that plan. I also have Mirror Converter, but I usually play this anyway as a mana dork, and it just happens to also have Toxic, so it has extra value in this deck. The primary objective is to basically just draw cards and disrupt our opponents while we do so. We have a bunch of creatures that draw cards on attack or when they deal damage, like Mischievous Catgeist, Eternal of Harsh Truths, and Library Larcenist, as well as some enchantments like Curiosity, Reconnaissance Mission, and Coastal Piracy. In addition to that, we have some disruptive creatures like Azure Beastbinder to stop opposing creatures, Ghostly Pilferer to draw more cards as they cast their commander and such, and Brazen Borrower to make them pick something up that's causing us issues. We also have a couple of ninjas with Moon Circuit Hacker and Mist Syndicate Naga, the latter of which is absurd with Tetsuko since it can make multiple copies that are also unblockable, and this snowballs really quickly if not dealt with. Aside from our creatures, we have typical blue stuff with Cyclonic Rift, some counter spells, and some MDFCs, but the most important thing I want to cover is the removal. Generally in mono blue, I stick to Resculpt, Raven Form, and Imprison in the Moon, and I'll usually forego things like Witness Protection, Eaten by Piranhas, and Amphibian Downpour, because they can block to kill their creature so they can reanimate it or recast it in its original form. But in this deck, since almost our entire deck is unblockable thanks to Tetsuko, this game plan goes out the window. So until they can sacrifice their dude, destroy the enchantment, or kill Tetsuko during combat but before blocks, they're stuck with a mostly useless 1/1, so these cards have so much more value in this deck than in any other mono blue deck. This deck is sweet and a lot more aggressive than other blue decks in the format, and I'm excited to show it to you, so I'm going to stop rambling and we're going to get into the games. Game 1, we're on the draw against Rothka, Bonded, and Golfer, and we keep at 7. They start things off with a forest and passes. We draw and start by playing a Polluted Delta and passing. Opponent untaps and plays a forest into a Drover of the Mighty. We respond by cracking our Delta to grab an island. Drover resolves and they pass the turn. We untap and play an island followed by a Shoreline Looter before we pass. Opponent untaps and plays a forest before they plot an Outcast Trailblazer and pass. We untap and play an island before going to combat. We attack for 1 unblockable, and we ninjutsu in our Mist Syndicate Naga, picking up our looter. It hits, and we make a token copy and pass the turn. Opponent untaps and plays an Elysian Caryatid, followed by a 3-tree Root Weaver before passing. We untap and play Otawara Soaring City, followed by Tetsuko. We attack with both our ninjas, which can't be blocked, and we hit for 6. We make 2 copies for a total of 4, and we pass the turn. Opponent untaps and casts their Outcaster they had plotted. They make a green mana and cast a Tyrannax Rex. I tried to mana drain and Eaten by Piranhas before Rima reminded me I could do neither, so I unfortunately let it resolve and take the hit for 8. At the end step, we flash in Fairy Mastermind and go to our turn. We untap, and even though we only have 15 damage on board, not quite lethal, our opponent scoops it up anyway. Game 2, we're on the draw against Amadi, and we keep it 7. Opponent mulligans twice to 6, and starts off with an Evolving Wilds. They crack it for a forest, and pass. We untap and start with an island before passing. Opponent untaps and plays a Thornwood Falls before sending it back. We untap and play a Hall of the Storm Giants into a Mind Stone before we pass. Opponent untaps and plays a Demolition Field followed by a Gwena Eyes of Gaia before they pass. We untap and start with an island followed up with a Thrumming Bird and Tetsuko before we pass. Opponent untaps and they cast Amadi, which cascades into a Druid class. Everything resolves and they pass, missing a land drop. We untap and drop a Plaza of Heroes into a Might Stone and Weak Stone. We use it to kill Amadi and move to combat. We hit them for 2 and cast an Arcane Signet before we pass the turn. Opponent untaps and drops a Haywire Might. They use it to exile our Power Stone, then cast a Thirsting Roots to go grab an island. They play it to gain a life, then attack for 2 and pass the turn. We untap and play an island, followed with Coastal Piracy to start drawing some cards. We get in for 2 damage, draw 2 cards, and then cast a Ghostly Pilferer before we pass. Opponent untaps and casts a Colossal Majesty. They move to combat and attack for 2 before sending it back. We untap and immediately go to combat. We attack for 4 and hit to draw 3 cards. Next, we play an island and an Ornithopter of Paradise. We then foretell a Raven form and cast a Mockingbird to copy Ghostly Pilferer for even more card draw before we pass it back. Opponent untaps and plays a Rimewood Falls to gain a life. They level up their Druid class before attacking for 2 and passing. We untap and Pilferer triggers, we pay to draw a card, and then start with a Flooded Strand. We crack it to reduce our land count before going to combat. We attack with everything except the Thopter, and it all hits to draw us 4 cards. Post-combat, we cast the Seagate Restoration to double our cards in hand before we pass the turn. Opponent untaps and is able to recast Amadi. Since it was cast from the command zone, we get to draw 2 cards, and it cascades to draw us 2 more cards before they pass the turn. We untap, and first things first, our Pilferer triggers. We don't pay for them before we drop and crack a Scalding Tarn. We get an island before running out our Invasion of Segovia. We make some 1/1s that have trample for some reason, then cast Triskaidekaphile. Then we cast Imprison in the Moon on Amadi before going to combat. We send our Pilferers at the battleship to flip it. We have 16 cards in hand, so we're not that far from the Trisk win, so I'm avoiding drawing cards to head to that. We run out a few cards in hand to get under the threshold, then pass. We can either counter something or cast something with flash, so either way we can get the 14th card out of our hand for Trisk. Opponent untaps and plays a forest to gain another life. Then they cast Galta Stampede Tyrant. We Tails End it to counter it, which puts us at exactly 13 cards in hand. Opponent sees the Trisk win coming, and they scoop it up. Game 3. We're on the play against Karumonix, and we keep it 7. We start with an island, and we pass the turn. Opponent starts with a swamp and a fountain port bell. They fail to find a land and pass it back. We untap and play an island, followed by a thrumming bird before we pass. Opponent untaps and plays a swamp into a valley rot collar before sending it back to us. We untap and play an island and an arcane signet. We use signet to cast Tetsuko and attack for 1 before we pass. Opponent untaps and plays their commander, Karumonix. It triggers and finds them a couple rats before they attack for 1. Rot Collar triggers to deal an extra damage, and they pass. We untap and immediately go to combat to attack for 2. We then play an untapped Seagate, then run out Eternal of Harsh Truths and a Mischievous Catgeist before we pass. Opponent untaps and plays a Blightbelly Rat and a Nezumi Cutthroat before they pass. We untap and play an Invasion of Segovia. We move to combat and send everything at it to flip it. We then draw a card from Eternal of Harsh Truth, then untap our board at the end step before we pass. Opponent untaps and plays a swamp, followed by a Psychic Wharf. We mana drain it because otherwise we'll have to discard it, and it's either use it or lose it. Next, they cast an Eternal Thirst on the Nezumi before going to combat and attacking with everything. Rot Collar hits us for 3, then we block with our face and go down to 9 and 4 poison before they We untap and use our mana drain to cast Season of Weaving to draw 5 cards. We play a Reliquary Tower and a Mind Stone before going to combat. We attack with Tetsuko, the cat, and Eternal to hit for 3 and draw 2 cards. Post-combat, we convoke out our River's Rebuke to make them pick up their board, then we untap some stuff and pass the turn. Opponent untaps and starts with a Swamp and a Karumonix. We Tails End to put it back in the command zone. Then they cast a Blightbelly Rat and their Fountain Port Bell. This time they find a swamp and they pass it back to us. We untap and play an island before we mutate Sea Dasher Octopus onto the Thrumming Bird. We go to combat and then smash with everything except for the flip battle. We hit for 6 and draw 3 cards. Post-combat, we cast a Nimble Brigand before we untap some stuff and pass the turn. Opponent untaps and plays the Swamp and replays the Valley Rot Collar, then Karumonix. The rat triggers and finds 0 cards before they move to the end step. We resculpt it to get it off the board, then cast Eaten by Piranhas on the rock collar before we go to our turn. We untap and move straight to combat to attack with everything except the battle. We smash them to 12 and draw 4 cards. Then we play a Castle Vantress and a Might Stone and Weak Stone to kill the 4/4 we gain. We foretell Raven form, then pass the turn, untapping some creatures along the way. Opponent untaps and plays a Swamp, followed by the Nezumi Cutthroat and a Rat Colony. They played the Eternal Thirst on the Rat Colony before going to combat and attacking with what they have. We take the hit down to 6 and 5 poison before they pass the turn. We go to combat and attack with everything as we have been, minus the battle. They draw the Fountain Port Bell, and we smash them down to 5 and draw 4 cards ourselves. Next, we play the Cavern of Souls, naming Rogue, then Raven form the Rat Colony. We follow up by casting a Coastal Piracy and a Mere Convert. We untap some stuff at the end step and pass the turn. Opponent untaps and plays a Swamp, followed by a Nezumi Informant. It enters and we discard an island. Then they play and crack a Chromatic Star to draw a card. Next, they play a Lord Skitter's Butcher, but it does not resolve as it eats our Long River's Pull. Opponent goes to combat and attacks with everything they can. We respond by picking up the Nezumi with Brazen Borrower and the Blightbelly Rat with Sink into Stupor. We block the Rock Collar and take 1 from the bird, then they recast the Blightbelly Rat. We counterspell, and they pass the turn. We untap and move to combat and attack with everything, including the battle. They block it, of course, because it's the only thing that can be blocked, but they take the very lethal damage. Game 4. We're on the draw against Gisa and Geralf, and we take our free mulligan to keep at 7. Opponent plays a Swamp and plays a Shambling Gas before passing. We start things off with a tapped MDFC and pass it back. Opponent untaps and plays a Swamp before attacking for 1 before passing. We untap and play and crack a Polluted Delta to play an Iron Crag before we pass it back. Opponent untaps and plays an island before attacking for 1 and passing the turn. We untap and play and crack a Prismatic Vista. We grab an island, then play Swiftfoot Boots before passing. Opponent untaps and plays a Westvale Abbey and Gisa and Geralf. We respond with Jwari Disruption to counter it before they attack for 1 and pass. We untap and play a Castle Vantress followed by our commander. We say no to Iron Crag and equip boots to Tetsuko. We play the Mirror Convert, then attack for 1 and pass the turn. Opponent untaps and plays a Locktwain Scorn on our Convert, followed by a Lazatep Reaver before they pass the turn. We untap and run out the Reliquary Tower and attack for 1 before we send it back. Opponent untaps and plays a Temple of Deceit. They scry to the bottom and attack with everything before passing. We activate the castle to scry 2 to the bottom before going to our turn. We untap, and once again we have Invasion of Segovia. We make some tokens and attack it for 1 before we pass the turn. Opponent untaps and moves to combat to attack for 3 before passing. We untap and slam everything into Segovia. During combat, they play an Overcharged Amalgam. Not thinking about our stuff being unblockable, I sugarcoat the Amalgam so we can still flip the battle, even though it wouldn't have mattered either way. Regardless, we play a Nykthos and pass the turn, untapping our board along the way. Opponent untaps and goes straight to combat and attacks with everything. We don't block, and post-combat, they cast a Beseech the Mirror, bargaining it with the food we gave them. They go to grab a Languish to clear the board before passing. We untap and recast Tetsuko with the boots. We then play the Key to the Vault. We attack for 1 and pass the turn. Opponent untaps and casts their commander. They mill some cards and pass the turn. We untap and equip the key to Tetsuko. We attack for 1 and hit, triggering our key to find an island we can't play. Then we turn Gisa and Giralf into some legitimate business people and pass it back. Opponent untaps and plays a Narfi Betrayer King before attacking for 1 and passing. We untap and play an island before going to combat and attacking for 1. He finds us a Guild Pact Informant before we pass the turn. Opponent untaps and plays an Archghoul of Thraben before going to combat. They attack for 5, and we flash in the Amphibian Downpour to turn off the rest of their board into 1/1 frogs. We take 2 and activate the castle at the end step. We keep both on top, and they pass. We untap and go to combat and attack for 2. We cast our Shoreline Looter from the top of our library, then we cast Fibblethip from our hand. We turn our Iron Crag into an equipment, then plot a River's Rebuke and a Might Stone and Weak Stone from our library before passing. Opponent untaps and plays a Swamp, followed by a Grim Servant. They fetch for a Blade Stitch Scab and cast it before passing the turn. We untap and go to combat to attack with our Looter and Tetsuko. We put Cavern of Souls on the battlefield and draw a Mist Syndicate Naga and discard the island. We play the Might Stone and Weak Stone to draw 2 cards, then play an island and plot a Search for Azcanta. Next, we play a Staff of Completion and River's Rebuke their board before we pass it back. Opponent untaps and starts by recasting Gisa and Geralt. They mill 4, then cast Lazatep Reaver from the graveyard before passing it back to us. At the end step, we activate Castle to scry before we go to our turn. We start by playing the Search for Azcanta and attaching the Iron Crag to our Shoreline Looter before moving to combat. We attack with everything and ninjutsu in our Mist Syndicate Naga, picking up our Guild Pact. We make a token copy, put an island to the bottom, and draw a card before we pass. Opponent untaps and starts with an Extinction event. We can't stop this, and they name Odd, wiping half our board and leaving theirs perfectly intact. Next, they play a Shambling Ghast and a Crypt Breaker before going to combat. They attack for 5, and we scry in response. Keeping the Cyclonic Rift on top before they pass the turn. During our upkeep, we go ahead and flip Azcanta and draw the Rift. We go to combat and attack for 5. We get to draw and key triggers to find a land we can't play. We replay our Informant before passing the turn. Opponent untaps and attacks with everything. We respond with Cyclonic Rift to pick it up. They respond with that pesky Amalgam from earlier to try and counter it. The Amalgam itself resolves, and we respond by casting Bavine Veils. They respond to that by casting the End on our Looter. Since they're completely tapped out now, I feel a lot safer casting Tail's End on the Amalgam trigger so our Cyclonic Rift can resolve. They pick it all up and move to end step. They discard some cards and pass the turn. We untap and immediately move to combat so we can attack for exactly lethal damage. I feel like I say this every week, but this deck is genuinely insane. Most blue decks are trying to control the board and usually win with some kind of combo or causing the opponents to scoop out of boredom. But the unique angle of being somewhat aggressive and consistently disrupting the opponent's game plan makes this probably my favorite deck I've played for this channel so far. One thing I didn't get to do in the games that I really wanted to was Cherix the Raging Isle. So Cherix is a 0/17, so it's unblockable thanks to Tetsuko, and it effectively has Ward 2 before Ward was a mechanic. The important thing though is you can pay 3 mana and give it +X -X, where X is the number of islands you control. I have a bunch of utility lands in this deck, so there's not as many islands as you'd expect, but getting it unblocked with this thing can easily end the game in one attack. You can activate it multiple times too, so as long as you don't kill it through the ability, you could theoretically hit someone for 16 unblockable damage with it. Anyway, that's everything for today. If you want to check out the deck for yourself, you can find a full deck list in the description below. While you're down there, feel free to tap that like button too. It adds 1 mana to the YouTube algorithm and I'd greatly appreciate it. If you enjoyed the video, then go ahead and subscribe too, so you can become a member of the Blue Crew today. If you want to see some more of my content, then you can click here to check out last week's video where we hurt ourselves with Kirik, son of Yawgmoth, or you can click on this playlist to watch some of my shorts.